The night wind at the house, at the end of the lane. I was 11 the year the river rose. It's the first detail that always comes back the way the rain didn't fall so much as arrive, sideways and relentless, like a freight train of needles. Our house sat at the very end of Maple Bend Lane, where the asphalt surrendered to a thin strip of woods and then the river beyond. And bad weather always felt a little worse out there. That night, it felt personal. My parents had driven out to an alumni fundraiser in the next town over. The plan was simple. They'd be back by 10. By 8, the storm had strengthened enough that the county sent out a phone alert about flooded intersections and downed power lines. At 9:30, Dad called from a landline at some friend's house. Cell coverage had gone patchy, saying the roads between here and there were too washed out to risk. "We're staying with Mark and Lisa," he said, like a nurse trying out a calm voice. "We're 15 minutes from the venue, not 40 from you. The sheriff's recommending nobody drive unless they have to." Mom got on long enough to recite a list. Lock all the doors and windows, leave the kitchen light on, close the blinds, keep the cordless phone charging on the counter. "We're so sorry, honey," she said. "We'll be there first thing in the morning." I told them I wasn't a baby, and that I loved them, and that I would be fine. I meant 2 of those 3 things. It felt like found freedom for an hour. A bowl of the sugary cereal Mom only allowed on Saturdays. A fistful of gummy worms. The TV volume up a notch higher than I knew they liked. The living room in our house was an interior room. No windows to the outside. Only a hallway to the kitchen and a picture frame opening to the foyer. So the weather was something I could hear but not see. Thunder knocked books on the shelf into the wall every few minutes, but the cocoon of the couch felt safe. My grand plan was to stay up all night and then sleep on and off the next day. The sort of chaos that feels like rebellion when you're not quite a teenager. What actually happened was the sugar crashed my eyelids shut during the 3rd episode of a rerun. When I woke, the TV had gone to that dim screensaver, the one that only kicked in after 3 hours of inactivity. The room was colder. The kind of colder that doesn't feel like night air so much as something wrong. I sat up, rubbing at the goose flesh on my arms, and then remembered Mom's list. The guilt arrived fast, the way it always did with me at that age, as if love only counted if you did everything you'd promised. I told myself I'd feel warmer if I got moving. I paused the hum in my head long enough to listen. The storm was still strong, prickling on the roof and thrumming in the gutters. The living room had no windows, but drafts find routes, and I told myself the cold was imagination tinged with weather. The kitchen was a different story. One large window over the sink, a smaller one near the breakfast nook, the back door with its narrow vertical pane. I clicked the overhead light and instantly winced, bright felt exposed, like I'd put myself on stage for the river to see. I crossed to the back door first and turned the deadbolt. It had been locked already. The shades were down on the window. I lifted one corner and peered into the wet black yard. The porch light made a cone in the rain, nothing in it but water. I checked the window latch above the sink. It was sealed. The smaller window, too. I walked the long way back through the foyer, locking the front door, even though I knew it was locked. The miniature draft stoppers Mom liked to wedge against the thresholds lay neatly in place like sleepers. I went room to room on the ground floor, touching each window latch and choosing not to look too long through the glass at my own small reflection and the storm behind it. Everything was shut. Everything was tight. And yet the cold persisted. I put my palm to the glass of the dining room and felt the cheap bite of heat leaving, but no air. The thermostat in the hallway read 65, which was lower than my parents ever allowed, but not breathtakingly so. I told myself the storm was stealing heat faster than the furnace could give it back, and that this was a math problem, and that math wasn't scary. It was numbers that could be solved. Then a sound came that wasn't rain or thunder. A small, soft creak. The kind that a house full of wood makes, as it breathes, but not from above or below. From close. From the place where you announce yourself. I froze and realized I had been breathing too loud to hear things. It's a strange habit I still have when I'm alone at night. I let my chest go still and count. My hearing sharpens when I starve it of the sound of myself. What cut through then was a little cock, cock, cock. Not big enough to be a footstep. Not soft enough to be a drop in the sink. It came again, slightly to the left, near the refrigerator, and then again, under the sink. If you've ever heard a screw fall against tile, you know the sound. That metallic rolling tick like a mechanical beetle deciding where to die. I crouched near the fridge and peered into the inch of darkness between it and the wall. Something small glinted there, and I reached in with 2 fingers. A screw. Cool to the touch, and flecked with something that wasn't rust. Something tacky, dirt-stained. I stood so fast, my knees popped. The cold in the kitchen gained a meaning I didn't like. Everything on the list was done, and yet the air was colder, which implied a route, which implied an opening I hadn't considered. I was 11. I did not consider heat registers or attic vents or the unsealed places where pipes pass through wood. But I knew there were pipes beneath the sink. Dad had sworn at them twice in my hearing. If someone wanted a door that didn't squeal on hinges, they might not choose a door at all. I turned the cabinet pull under the sink and eased the door open. The smell of bleach and dish soap and garbage bags puffed out first, and then something else, a dampness like the underside of a river rock. The back of the cabinet was a blank sheet of particle board where the plumber had cut 2 circles around the pipes years ago. The holes were rough and larger than the pipes. That's normal, of course. It's what openings look like. But that night, those rings of darkness felt like sockets. I put my hand near the cold copper and felt faint but real. A whisper of air. The kind that moves because other air is making it move. Storms create pressure. Pressure makes houses exhale. Still, it didn't feel like breath from the house. It felt like breath from not the house. I shut the cabinet and stood in the middle of the room, trying to hold the number logic against the ghost logic. When the thunder cracked again and the lights flickered, the ghost logic won, and I heard my mother's list differently. Not as chores, but as a prayer. Lock doors, shut blinds, leave 1 light, make a circle, be small inside it. Upstairs was both worse and necessary. My bedroom had a single big window that faced the woods and the river. The living room, nestled in the middle of the house, had made the storm theoretical. My room would make it audible and visible and maybe, if I looked hard enough, explain the cold. I climbed the stairs quietly, which is a ridiculous thing to do when no one is home, and also the only possible thing to do when you believe maybe someone is. The hallway carpet muffled my footsteps. The wind threw rain at the side of the house in waves. I went into my room quickly, more so I didn't have time to change my mind than because of any bravery. I closed the door gently behind me and put my hand to the window. The glass vibrated faintly with every gust. I could hear individual drops nap against it like moths hitting a lamp. Every few seconds, lightning would compress the entire world into an instant, and the thunder would arrive right on its heels like an afterthought that wants to be first. I got into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin and told myself the human version of a furnace story. Heat rises, storms pull air, we live in a house that leaks like all houses leak, you're fine. The story worked for maybe 5 minutes, long enough for my shoulders to settle an inch into the pillow, long enough for my eyes to do that heavy thing they do when sleep comes back. Then the creak of wood came again. Not loud, not theatrical. The sound of something weight-bearing adjusting itself. The sound that, in a carpeted room, shouldn't be there. I told myself it was a tree. The sound didn't care. It came again. And because storms have a way of letting silence fall just when you need noise, there was a lightning gap without thunder, and I counted 3 little creaks between light and sound. I sat up. I let the next flash lift the world. My dresser, my bookshelf, the soccer poster, the closet door. Achar. I had closed it earlier. I never slept with it open. Fear has a geography in kids' rooms, and an open closet draws borders around a kingdom of imagination you don't want to pay taxes to. The door stood open the width of a hand. I could see the dark between hangers like a mouth that's thinking about it. I didn't make a plan. My body did. I got out of bed with a carefulness that felt animal and moved toward the door to the hallway, which meant moving past the closet. I don't remember making a conscious choice not to look. I remember the fact of not looking the way you remember, not touching a hot pan. The air by the closet was colder, and I know that, because it bit the wrist I didn't realize I had lifted to shield my face. The distance from my bed to the hallway was 7 steps. I took them like I had a tray balanced on my back. I opened my door, stepped into the hallway, closed it without letting the latch click, and then went down the stairs with knees that didn't feel like mine. It should be comic, the choice I made. The dining room table. If you had asked me that morning where I would hide if a burglar came, I would have described a closet, a bathroom with a lock, the crawl space under the stairs. The table didn't even have a tablecloth, just wood and 4 chairs. But fear sometimes chooses symbols. The dining room was where we said grace. It had the family photographs arranged too close together. The table was big enough to feel like a roof if you were a kid. I slid under and curled in on myself, the way they tell you to do in tornado drills, and I waited for my chest to quiet. When I could hear again, I wished I couldn't. There is a point at which the storm stops being the loudest thing. I heard the staircase complain. not a steady gait. A step, then a pause, then two in quick succession. Then a clumsy slide like a knee bumped a riser. A pinball rhythm. Someone moving in a body that didn't fit the house. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The kitchen light was still on. It cast a pale shape through the doorway into the dining room. A smear across the floor I could see from my wedge under the table. I told myself it would be nothing, the house shifting. The storm misbehaving right up until a pair of bare feet entered the light. Yellow with old dirt and new mud. Toes splayed a little as if balance were a story told on bad knees. Scratches cross-hatched over the shins like bramble had written on them. They stood there, inches beyond the table, and I heard the sound a human throat makes when it tries to be quiet and fails. The feet swayed. I felt a drop of water fall from somewhere and smack the floor, and the smell of wet and mold and something metallic edged into the room. Something fell from a hand I couldn't see, and hit the wood with a bright little tink that ricocheted around the chair legs. A wrench. A small one, the kind with a wheel you thumb to narrow its mouth. It skittered right to the edge of my vision and stopped 2 inches from my cheek. I didn't scream. It might be the hardest thing I've ever done. If the person bent, they would see me. That was the sentence that repeated. If they bend, if they bend, if they bend. They didn't. They stood very still for a count that took forever, the way only kids count 50 Mississippi, 51 Mississippi. Yes, I know those aren't seconds, and then they wobbled and moved on. Not out the front door. Through the dining room toward the hall and the kitchen, the wrench abandoned like a thought drop because a louder one came. I heard a sequence of small impacts, an elbow catching a chair back, a hand smearing along the wall. Then the back door made a soft, traitorous sound. A sound I can still hear. Wood against weather strip. A little sigh, and then the click of the latch. I stayed under the table until the storm found its voice again. Partly because there is a volume of fear that pins you, and partly because every time I thought about moving, I remembered the possibility that the person had only pretended to leave. The kitchen light kept humming. I watched the wrench. I watched a bead of water collect on its mouth and drop and collect and drop again. When I finally crawled out, my knees knocked together as if I had run a mile. I picked up the wrench and put it on the counter, because I did not want to have to explain a wrench on the floor to anyone in the morning. I locked the back door, which was already locked, and turned the deadbolt a second time like superstition. I checked the front door. I climbed the stairs and went to my room, and, like a greedy child sneaking a cookie after being caught, I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over my head and slept. In the morning, the storm had worn itself thin. My parents arrived with apologies and donuts and damp hair, and I said, "It's okay," and meant a third of it. I did not tell them. I don't know why. That's not precisely true. I do know why in the way kids do without words. I was ashamed I had slept on the couch too long. I was ashamed that I had not done the list in the right order. It felt juvenile to bring monsters into it. 2 things did happen that morning that don't fit neatly into shame. 1, the under-sink cabinet door stuck a little when Mom opened it to toss a grocery bag. "Weird," she said, swollen from the humidity. When she pushed it shut, the magnetic catch misaligned and she had to lift the corner to get it to seat. The second thing, I did the dishes and set the small wrench on a paper towel to dry and then put it in the junk drawer without thinking to ask why we owned a small wrench. We didn't. It took years for whatever was lodged in me from that night to dislodge enough to speak. I was in high school when it came up by accident. Dad had a friend over to help replace the faucet, and I hovered for a bit because I wanted to see the undersink region as a version of the past. The friend slid out on his back, holding a corroded gasket like something harvested. "Funny," he said, wiping his hands. "Somebody loosened these before we got here. Finger tight. Save me the trouble." Dad shrugged. "Last time I touched them was before he was born." I stood there with dish soap on my hands and felt not vindication, but a quiet spreading recognition, the sort that doesn't come with an audience. There are other explanations, of course. People leave houses unlocked in storms. A neighbor checks on you. A vagrant hides from the rain. A gust cracks a window. Houses remember with drafts, and we mistake the memory for presence. But the wrench was real. The cold was real. The scratches on the shins of the bare legs were real enough to leave a smell behind. A different detail returned months later, unbidden, as I was climbing the stairs at night and the house made that friendly old home groan. It was the way the feet had navigated our staircase. Not like a predator, but like someone negotiating a space that wasn't theirs, touching things to steady, pausing to listen, knocking into the world the way the world knocks into you when you're cold and wet and hurt. It should have made me feel sorry. It didn't. Empathy has to share a bed with the fact that I was a child under a table with a tool beside my cheek and a stranger's legs in my doorway. I slept with a nightlight for years after, and I learned the physics of houses enough to be able to tell myself different stories. Hot air is lazy, cold air is sneaky, water will go anywhere you tell it not to. The stories work until they don't. Sometimes a sound is just a sound. Sometimes it's a screw failing, and that's all. Sometimes it's someone else's privacy, scuffed and wet, entering your orbit long enough to leave a cold behind. The last odd thing happened 2 summers later when the river was low, and the town hired a crew to dredge debris near the public launch. I was pumping gas at the station, and one of the guys came in for coffee and a lottery ticket and told jokes about what you find when you invite a river to give back. Once pulled up a shopping cart and a lawn chair bungee corded to it, he said. Not even kidding. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, the old concrete storm culvert that ran under a section of Maple Bend, clogged with branches and the rusted carcass of something once mechanical. Could be an old space heater, he said. Could be a toolbox. Could be nothing. All jammed up around the screen where it meets the easement behind those last houses. I didn't go to look. That's important. I did not make a pilgrimage. I finished wiping bug guts off windshields and went home and did my summer reading, and later pretended to like beer at a bonfire like everyone else my age. But the culvert became a small private piece of furniture that slid into a corner of the memory room where I keep that night. There are routes we don't think about because we don't have to. There are mouths in a house you only see when you crawl beneath the sink. If you're waiting for a grand reveal, I don't have one. No confession scrawled in a journal buried in our crawl space. No doorbell camera footage discovered years later. This is the kind of story that doesn't end so much as slow. The cold this January felt like any other cold. The wrench in the junk drawer got used once to tighten a loose handle on the grill and then vanished the way small things do in families. Every now and then, when the forecast calls for flash flooding and the sheriff's voice comes thin across the radio, I remember my mother's list, as the spell it always was. Lock the doors and windows, keep one light, close the blinds, make a circle, be small inside it. And sometimes when the house sighs and wood speaks, I hear the faint, bright note of metal nicking wood and think about the way a drop tool can be merciful. How 2 inches can be the difference between a horror you remember and a horror you become. I am not superstitious. Not really. I pay my taxes to the kingdom of imagination now only as much as adults do when a shadow insists. But I still never sleep with the closet open. That's not superstition. That's policy. If you grew up in the kind of place where weather is a personality and rivers own the edges of your life, you know the lesson the storm taught me the night my parents were stuck on the safe side of town. Sometimes the danger outside wants in, and sometimes it's already inside trying to get back out. You don't need to know which. To be careful. You only need to recognize the cold when it doesn't belong, and understand that instructions like my mother's are for more than drafts. They're how you make a shape to survive in. People ask why I didn't call the police. They don't ask like a challenge. They ask the way adults ask kids to be the kind of adults they wish they had been. My answer is the only honest one I can give. I was a child, and I obeyed the list I had. The list said locks, blinds, light. It did not say sirens. It did not say what to do when the wrench lands by your face. I learned to add to the list later. Call. Tell. Ask someone to come over. Learn the names of the openings in your house. Even now, on the rare nights when insomnia uncovers the memory and the night feels thinner than it should, I go downstairs and stand in the kitchen with the light on and open the cabinet under the sink. I press my hand against the particle board back and feel nothing but the cool of a house being a house. Sometimes a faint thread of air moves past my fingers, and I let it. I don't shove things into the hole or tape it or scold myself for checking. I just stand there and listen to the water move through what belongs to us and picture, without animosity but also without permission, the other lives that pass near ours on their own nights, in their own weather, wet and hurt and clumsy, dragging a small piece of iron through a room they'll never be allowed to claim. Then I close the door. I lock the back. I turn off the kitchen light and leave the hall one on, because rituals matter even when you grow up, especially then. And I go back upstairs and pull the closet door firmly shut and sleep. The man at the window. I've told parts of this story before, usually in fragments, like an anecdote I trot out at a party when the night's already drunk and everyone's comparing weird dream stories. But I've never told the whole thing. Not in detail. Not in a way that stretches across the years the way it actually did. People tend to expect horror to be quick. A scream, a discovery, a climax. But some horrors unfold like slow leaks, stretching on and on until you can't tell if they've stopped or if you've just learned to live with the sound. This one started when I was 8 years old. The first dream. The first time it happened, I was lying in bed on a school night, staring at the glowing numbers on my alarm clock. They were a dull green, the kind that leaves after images when you blink. I must have dozed, because when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it. That's the best way I can explain it. My perspective had shifted to the ceiling, as though I were watching myself through a mounted security camera. I could see the top of my head, my blanket rising and falling with each breath, the cluttered surface of my nightstand. I tried to move, but all I managed was a slow swivel of my head. The rest of me, my actual body, lay frozen in bed, oblivious. Even as a kid, I knew this was wrong. Dreams usually have that slippery logic where impossible things seem ordinary. Not this one. This felt clinical, detached, like I'd stumbled into a surveillance feed I was never supposed to see. The first thing I noticed was the clock. The numbers weren't ticking forward. They were counting backward. Hours, minutes, seconds, all sliding into negative territory. Something about that tiny detail unmoored me more than the out-of-body view ever could. Clocks aren't supposed to move that way. Time isn't supposed to move that way. And then I saw the drawings. Crayon pictures were taped at odd angles around my room. On the dresser, near the door frame, even crooked across the lampshade. They looked like the kind of art teachers hang during open houses, rows of stick figures, holding hands, smiling with square teeth. Always the same motif. A group of people in front of a house with a bright blue roof, with one smaller figure that was clearly supposed to be me. But I didn't draw those pictures. I didn't draw at all. Not if I could help it. I didn't even own crayons. Before I could panic, my dream eyes drifted toward the window, and right on cue, a face appeared. The man. He was only inches from the glass. His breath didn't fog it, though it was as if the storm outside had chilled the paint so much that nothing warm could touch it. His hair was short and gray, his skin pale and stretched thin. What I noticed most, though, was the scar. A raw, angry line across his left temple, disappearing into the hairline. It looked like it had split him once, like a crack in old plaster that someone forgot to patch. He stared at me, or at my sleeping body with eyes that never blinked. Then, slowly, his hand rose and he began clawing at the window. Not tapping, not knocking, clawing, like an animal desperate to get in. That's when I woke up, sweating through my pajamas. I bolted upright and stared at the actual window. It was locked. No marks, no scarred man. Just the night and my own reflection, pale and wide-eyed. But the dream had left a residue, something thick and sour in my stomach. I didn't sleep again that night. Recurrence. It didn't stop with one dream. It came back every couple of months, always the same. Ceiling perspective, backward clock, those alien drawings, the toy train I'd lost years before reappearing in new spots on the carpet, and always, always the man at the window. After the fourth dream, I told my parents. Mom gave me the kind of smile she reserved for skinned knees. Recurring dreams are normal, sweetie, especially at your age. Dad was, you said, viết tiếp câu chuyện số 2, camera trần nhà, Uncle Brian. Viết lại mạch lạt. ChatGPT said, got it. I'll rewrite story 2, the ceiling camera dream, divided by Uncle Brian, in a smoother, clearer flow. Still first person, still in English, but with more natural pacing and transitions. I'll aim for a long, immersive, true scary story narrative, around 2,500 words. The man at the window. I was around 8 when the dreams began. Looking back, I don't know if dream is the right word, nightmare fits better, but even that doesn't quite capture it. These episodes weren't wild or surreal the way most childhood dreams are. They felt fixed, like watching the same film reel on repeat, each frame already decided long before I closed my eyes. The first dream. I remember lying in bed, staring at the digital clock on my nightstand. The numbers glowed green in the dark, steady and reassuring. At some point, my eyelids must have drifted shut, because the next time I opened them, something was terribly wrong. I wasn't inside my body anymore. Instead, I hovered near the ceiling, looking down at myself as if through a security camera. My body lay stiff beneath the blanket, chest rising and falling. My eyes scanned the room, though I could barely move only enough to swivel my gaze. The first detail I noticed was the clock. It wasn't ticking forward. The numbers were slipping backward, racing down towards 0 like a countdown. My stomach turned, and I tried to will myself awake. Nothing happened. Then my eyes wandered to the walls. That's when I saw the drawings. Dozens of crayon sketches were taped at odd angles on the dresser, on the closet door, even crooked along the lampshade. Each showed the same thing, a group of people holding hands in front of a blue-roofed house. In the lineup of smiling stick figures, there was always one smaller shape, set apart, that I knew was supposed to be me. But I hadn't drawn them. I wasn't even the type of kid who liked drawing. I tried to look away, to blink the images out of existence. But my gaze turned toward the window, and there he was. A man's face filled the glass. His hair was cropped short and gray, his skin waxy, almost translucent. What stood out most was the deep scar running across his left temple, angry and uneven, like his skull had once cracked and healed wrong. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He just stared at me, at my sleeping body, and then slowly raised one hand. His nails scraped against the glass, over and over, as though he was trying to claw his way in. That's when I jolted awake in my bed, heart hammering. The window was shut, the room empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been real. The recurrence. The dream came back, not the next night, not even the next week, but every couple of months, like clockwork. Always the same sequence. My body below, the clock counting down, the strange drawings, the toy train I'd lost years earlier showing up in new spots on the carpet, and then his face at the glass. After the fourth time, I told my parents. Mom smiled sympathetically and explained that recurring dreams were common for kids. She told me to leave a light on if I felt nervous. Dad cut in, his voice firmer, telling me to remember that they were only a room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded, pretending their words helped. But deep down, I knew they didn't believe me. The dreams eventually faded. Months passed without incident, and I let myself hope they were gone for good. Until one night, when everything changed, the window opens. It started the same as always. Ceiling perspective, backward clock, the drawings in the toy train. But this time, when I turned my gaze to the window, something was different. The window was already open. The curtains shifted with a cold night breeze. My heart hammered, even in the dream, and then I woke paralyzed. I couldn't move a finger, couldn't lift my head. My brain screamed at me to get up, to shut the window, to run, but my body refused. For 5 endless minutes I lay frozen, convinced he was already climbing inside. When the paralysis finally lifted, I stumbled to the window. It was locked. The curtains hung still, but the air in my room was icy, as if someone had just left. I didn't sleep again that night. My parents' reaction. The next morning I told my parents again, this time with every detail I could remember. The backward clock, the crayon drawings, the scar on the man's forehead. Dad's expression shifted the moment I mentioned the scar. He cut me off mid-sentence, asking if I was certain. When I nodded, his eyes flicked toward Mom. Something silent passed between them, heavy and uncomfortable. They assured me everything was fine, that I had nothing to worry about. But I could tell they were hiding something. A few days later, they sat me down. Mom did most of the talking. She explained that when I was a toddler, there had been a man named Brian who used to babysit me. He wasn't family, just an old friend of Dad's from college. I apparently adored him. I cried when he left, begged for him to read me to sleep. But one day, there had been a falling out. My parents didn't say what happened, only that it was serious enough that Dad banned Brian from ever coming near our family again. They cut him out completely. The detail that chilled me most? Brian had a scar on his forehead, from a car accident, years before I was born. The final year. After that conversation, the dream slowed. I had maybe 1 or 2 over the next year, but nothing like before. For a while, life returned to normal. I almost convinced myself it had all been some strange psychological trick. Then came the night that ended it all. I woke from the dream as usual, sweating and unsettled. Out of habit, I glanced toward the window, and I saw movement. Just a flicker, but enough to send every nerve in my body screaming. I shouted for my parents. Dad bolted outside barefoot while Mom clutched me tight. When he returned, he whispered something to her I couldn't hear. Later, he admitted he thought he'd seen faint footprints in the mud beneath my window. I asked if it could have been Brian. Dad shook his head, insisting it was impossible. We'd moved towns, and Brian didn't know our address. Still, the certainty in his voice felt forced. That night was the last time I ever had the dream. Reflection. Even now, I don't know what to believe. Was Brian really outside my window all those years? Was my brain dredging up a buried childhood memory, mixing it with sleep paralysis until it felt real? Or was it some stranger entirely? Someone I never identified, who just happened to leave a mark on my subconscious? What unsettles me most is the overlap, the scar, the drawings I never made, the toy train I'd lost. Those details felt too specific to dismiss. And then there's the final piece I can't shake. When I asked Dad years later if the police had ever been called that night, he just smiled and told me not to worry. But I'm 95% sure no call was ever made. I'll probably never know the truth. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the night is cold, I catch myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see a scarred face staring back. The last day of middle school is supposed to be bittersweet. All laughter and scribbled signatures in yearbooks. Kids running around the halls like they're finally free after a long prison sentence. That's how it was for most people, and for the first couple of hours I thought that's how it would be for me too. Our school was huge, over 1,000 students, and the teachers had this system where they collected everyone's yearbooks, passed them around to different classrooms, and let people sign who they wanted. It was chaotic but fun, and when I finally got mine back near the end of the day, I couldn't wait to flip through the pages. At first it was normal, exactly what I expected. Dumb inside jokes, stay cool messages, goofy drawings from my friends. Then, about halfway through, my eyes landed on something that didn't belong. There was a signature under the picture of a kid I had never seen before. He'd written, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again," and then signed his name, Samuel Robinson III. I froze. It wasn't just that I didn't know him personally. I had never even seen him in the halls, never heard his name in class, never once noticed him in the cafeteria. Yet here he was, in my yearbook, writing like we shared some private connection. For a minute, I convinced myself it was just a mistake. Maybe he thought he was signing someone else's book. But the way he phrased it, "I'll be seeing you again," wasn't random. It felt targeted, intentional. When the day ended, I shoved the book into my backpack and told myself not to think about it. I went home, tried to enjoy the relief of summer starting, and by evening, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. That night, 3 of my best friends came over: Kevin, David, and Kieran, for a sleepover in my basement. We loaded up on chips and soda, set up the Xbox, and played Call of Duty until our eyes burned. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so as far as we were concerned, we had the run of the house. It was the perfect night, loud and stupid, and exactly how the start of summer should be. Around 2 in the morning, we were still awake, taking turns on my dad's old rowing machine and laughing at each other's attempts. That's when the sound came. 3 sharp knocks on the storm door at the back of the basement. Not the front door, not the side door, but the storm door that led directly to where we were. We froze. None of us had any reason to expect someone at that hour. The knocking repeated, steady, almost rhythmic. Kieran, always the one who couldn't keep his mouth shut, called out, "Who's there?" His voice echoed through the basement. I wanted to punch him. Whoever was outside might not have even known we were down there, but now they definitely did. For a long moment there was silence. Then a muffled voice answered back, cheerful, high-pitched, almost sing-song. "Come around to the back door." The voice was young, teenage. But there was something off about how calm and casual it sounded, like whoever it was knew exactly who we were. My heart thudded in my chest. My friends didn't seem as fazed. They thought maybe it was some other kid from school messing with us. They urged me to at least check it out. Against my better judgment, I crept upstairs to the kitchen where the glass-paneled back door stood. Through the narrow window, I could see a figure under the dim porch light. As I moved closer, his face came into view, and I nearly dropped to the floor. It was him, the kid from the yearbook, Samuel Robinson III. My friends rushed behind me, whispering, laughing nervously. They wanted to open the door, but I stopped them, blurting out that I knew who it was. I explained the signature in my yearbook, the creepy message. Their faces shifted from curiosity to unease. Meanwhile, Samuel stood there staring in at us. When he realized I wasn't opening the door, he started motioning toward the side of the house, beckoning me to come closer to the window. Against all reason, I slid the kitchen window open just a crack. He leaned toward it, eyes shining with a strange intensity, and said, "So you got my message." He introduced himself Sam and started talking like we were long-lost friends. He said he had always watched me from afar, that he thought we could have been close, that we were supposed to know each other. His tone was calm, almost kind. but I felt my skin crawl. I tried to play along, nodding, giving short answers, anything to keep him from snapping. Then I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't answer. He just smiled wider, as if I'd asked something funny. Before I could press him, David made the mistake of calling him a creepy stalker and telling him to leave. That was the trigger. The smile vanished. Sam tilted his head, like he couldn't understand what he'd just heard. Then his expression twisted into pure rage. He started shouting, voice cracking, screaming that he hated my friends, that we all deserved to die. He spewed out details he shouldn't have known, names of kids I'd dated, private arguments, insults he claimed people had said behind my back, things he had no right knowing. Then he reached for the window, trying to force it open. I slammed it shut and locked it as he began pounding on the glass, snarling like an animal. The noise was enough to wake my parents upstairs. They came rushing down, demanding to know what was going on. At that, Sam bolted. By the time my dad opened the door and stepped outside, he was gone, swallowed by the dark. My parents were furious at first, thinking we'd been playing a prank or making noise. But when I explained everything in a rush, the yearbook, the message, the kid outside, they sobered up fast. They didn't call the police, though. They said they'd deal with the school in the morning, give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next day, my parents contacted the administration. That's when we learned the truth. Sam had been expelled weeks before the school year ended. He shouldn't have even been on campus the last day, shouldn't have been anywhere near the yearbooks. His photo was only included because the yearbooks were printed earlier in the year, which meant he had deliberately snuck back into the building just to write that message to me. The school tried to track him down, but it was like he and his family didn't exist. No forwarding address, no contact information, nothing. It was as if they had vanished. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house at night made me jump. I avoided looking out windows after dark. My friends joked about it at first, but even they admitted how unsettling the whole thing was. My parents told me not to talk about it, said drawing attention would only make things worse. And maybe they were right. Sam never showed up again. But sometimes I catch myself thinking about that night, the way his face looked under the porch light, that strange mixture of obsession and hatred, the way he said, "I'll be seeing you again," like it was a promise. I still have that yearbook. The signature hasn't faded. Every now and then I flip to the page and stare at the handwriting, trying to figure out if it's really as sinister as I remember, or if I was just a kid letting paranoia grow bigger than it was. But then I recall his voice through the window, calm at first, then broken with rage, and I know I didn't imagine it. Somewhere out there, Samuel Robinson III is or was real, and for one terrifying night, he wanted me to know he existed. When Lindsay first invited me to her family's beach house, I imagined something modest, maybe a 2-story place with peeling white paint and a porch that smelled like salt water. I wasn't prepared for the fortress that rose at the end of a private road. The house looked less like a vacation spot, and more like the kind of hidden compound you see in movies, about secret agents, flat, sharp angles, tinted glass windows, and a gated driveway with cameras watching from the corners. Lindsay's parents were neurosurgeons, loaded beyond belief, and I had always known she came for money. But until I stood staring at that place with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I didn't realize how far removed her life was from the rest of us. I tried not to gape, but she laughed and said, "Yeah, it's ridiculous, right?" The plan was simple. 4 of us, me, Lindsay, Sabrina, and Thea, would spend 3 nights together to celebrate finishing another year of college. No boyfriends, no parents, no responsibilities. Just drinks, sun, and the kind of freedom we all swore we deserved. We picked bunks in one of the kids' rooms, 2 sets of beds stacked on either side with an attached bathroom. It felt like summer camp for adults, except the camp had granite countertops, a private beach, and a wine cellar bigger than my apartment. For the first 2 days, everything went exactly as planned. We lounged in the sand until our shoulders glowed pink, grilled burgers on the patio, and spent long evenings talking about the future we were all pretending wasn't terrifying. On the 3rd night, we brought White Claws down to the beach. The air was damp and cool, the waves sighing rhythmically against the shore. Sabrina set a little Bluetooth speaker on the sand and played house music while we sipped and laughed and stared at the stars. It felt so ordinary, so stupidly safe, that when we noticed the flickering light down the shoreline, none of us thought to be afraid. At first, it looked like a lantern swaying in the dark. Then we realized it was a flashlight, swinging back and forth as a group of people walked toward us. We hushed instinctively, watching the bobbing light. Then a voice called out, friendly and casual, "Hey there!" It was a guy, maybe our age, and we all relaxed at once. When the figures finally came close, we saw 3 guys carrying beers, all tall, tan, and dressed like the beach was their natural habitat. They flopped onto the sand with us, introductions tumbling out between swigs of alcohol. Thea, predictably, was smitten. She was always the one who fell too quickly, who believed every laugh was proof of chemistry. The guys weren't overtly flirty, but they were charming enough, funny enough, and the alcohol smoothed the edges. We drank together for over an hour, swapping stories, listening to the waves, and letting the night stretch out like it had no end. Eventually, one of them suggested we head back to their place. I hesitated immediately. I was already tired and buzzed. The sand had chilled under me, and the idea of walking to some strange house with 3 guys I barely knew set every instinct on edge. But Thea's eyes were glowing, Sabrina was giggling, and even Lindsay looked tempted. I sighed and told them to go without me. "I'm calling it a night," I said, and trudged back toward the beach house alone, my flip-flops slapping against my heels. I showered, pulled on a t-shirt, and crawled into the bottom bunk with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd chosen rest over chaos. Sometime after 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a FaceTime call from Lindsay. "Half asleep," I answered, ready to tease her about staying out so late. Her face filled the screen, pale and wild-eyed, her voice breaking as she screamed, "They took them! Thea and Sabrina, they're in the trunk! Get the car now!" The words cut through me like ice water. My body went rigid, my heart stuttered, and suddenly I was wide awake, fumbling for clothes, shoes, anything. Lindsay's voice stayed on the line, frantic, giving me instructions through gasps. She'd argued with one of the guys and stormed off, only to realize she'd left her purse. When she went back for it, she saw them shoving my friends into the trunk of an SUV and driving off. She'd already called the police, but she needed me to follow. My hands shook as I grabbed Lindsay's car keys from the counter and bolted outside. The gate creaked open after I punched in the code she shouted through the phone. The tires screeched against the pavement as I floored it down the road, headlights cutting through the mist. Lindsay's voice in my ear was a lifeline. Silver SUV, 10 houses down the beach road heading north. I pressed the accelerator harder, the car rattling as the speed climbed higher than I'd ever driven. My chest hurt from how hard my heart was hammering. I was terrified of losing them, of being too slow, of seeing that SUV vanish into the night forever. The road was empty, mercifully, and after a few minutes I saw headlights ahead, moving slowly. My stomach dropped. It was them. I called the police, gave them our exact location, begged them to hurry. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance and not to engage, but every nerve in my body screamed to close the gap, to do something. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white, forcing myself to stay a few car lengths behind. The minutes stretched like hours until finally, red and blue lights appeared on the horizon. What happened next felt like a movie I'd been dropped into without warning. Multiple cruisers swarmed, sirens splitting the night. The SUV pulled over without a chase, the driver probably assuming it was some routine traffic stop. Officers rushed in with weapons drawn, yanking the men out and throwing them to the ground. Another officer popped the trunk, and I watched from behind the wheel as they pulled out Thea and Sabrina, bound, gagged, bruised, their eyes wide with terror. Relief crashed over me so violently I thought I might vomit. I stayed in the car, frozen, as chaos erupted ahead. The officers radioed, restrained the men, tried to comfort my friends. The girls were sobbing, shaking, barely able to speak. I finally stumbled out of the car when Lindsay arrived on foot, collapsing into her arms as the adrenaline drained from me in a rush. Later, in the fluorescent haze of the police station, the details came spilling out. The 3 men weren't staying in any beach rental. They had broken into a vacant house owned by an elderly couple away on vacation. They'd planned the entire thing, scoping out the area, waiting for the right group of girls to wander too far from safety. They were charged with kidnapping, assault, trespassing, and a list of other crimes I couldn't even process. Thea's parents, both high-powered lawyers, made sure they faced the maximum possible sentences. For weeks after, I replayed everything in my head. What if I'd gone with them that night? What if Lindsay hadn't realized she'd left her purse? What if the police had taken 5 minutes longer? Every scenario ended darker than I wanted to imagine. My friends were traumatized, even if they didn't talk about it much. Thea buried it under forced laughter. Sabrina went quiet for months, and Lindsay carried a guilt she never deserved. I tried to bury it too, but it sat in me like a stone. The beach, once a place of peace, became tainted. I couldn't walk along the sand without scanning the shadows, without imagining headlights flaring in the dark. I started locking every door twice, leaving lights on all night, waking from dreams where muffled screams echoed from the trunk of a car. People told us how lucky we were, how everything had worked out, but the truth is, nothing about that night felt lucky. It felt like we'd been dangling on the edge of something vast and unthinkable, and by pure chance the rope hadn't snapped. The memory of their bound wrists, their terrified eyes, the cold calm in the men's faces, it all lingers. I don't talk about it often. Most people wouldn't believe me, or they'd tell me not to dwell on it. But when I think about that house, that beach, and those men with their beers and easy smiles, I know how thin the line between safety and horror really is. And I know that for the rest of my life, part of me will always be listening for the sound of a trunk slamming shut in the dark. It was 4th of July weekend, and my best friend Jimmy had scored the kind of gig he'd been chasing for years. He and his crew ran event promotions up and down the East Coast, booking clubs and DJs, and this one was supposed to be their biggest yet. A packed venue right on the Jersey Shore, with a headliner people whispered about like he was a god behind the decks. Jimmy had been hyping it for weeks, and when he told me and our buddy Ryan we could roll with him early and hang out backstage, there was no way we were saying no. We drove down in his SUV, 3 hours of trash talk and blasting playlists, pulling up while the sun was still high. The venue was massive, a converted warehouse painted black with neon trim, the kind of place that already hummed with energy hours before the doors even opened. Jimmy disappeared almost instantly, barking orders and shaking hands, and Ryan and I were left to our own devices. The bar was already flowing for the crew, free drinks all night, and we didn't hold back. By the time the first DJ started, we were already buzzing, and by midnight we were way past that. The music was thunderous, the bass vibrating through the floor and up our legs, the strobes cutting the crowd into jerky frames of motion. At some point I lost track of how many drinks I'd had. Ryan was the same, grinning like an idiot, spilling beer on his shirt and not caring. That's when we met them. 2 girls, standing near the bar, dressed sharp enough that they didn't look like regulars. Marcella and Gianna, at least that's what they told us. They were stunning, tall, dark hair, expensive jewelry that glimmered under the lights. They didn't look like the kind of girls who had to buy their own drinks, but they insisted on handing us a pair. "You've got to catch up with us," Gianna laughed, pressing the cup into my hand. Her smile was dazzling. I remember thinking they were way out of our league, and maybe that's why I didn't question it. We left the venue together not long after. Marcella suggested we go back to her beach house, said it was right on the sand, way nicer than whatever Airbnb Jimmy had lined up for us. Ryan was all in immediately, and honestly, so was I. The night air outside felt cooler, saltier, and walking with them along the boardwalk felt surreal, like something out of a movie. They were funny, quick, sharp, asking questions that made us feel like we'd known them longer than the 30 minutes we actually had. But halfway to the house, something shifted in me. I felt drunker, much drunker than I should have been. My limbs got heavy, my knees weak, my eyes trying to roll back in my skull. It wasn't the normal sloppy drunk I knew what that felt like. This was different. My skin prickled, my vision blurred around the edges. I tried to laugh it off, but panic bubbled underneath. Then, just as quickly, the sensation passed, leaving me shaky but functional. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. The house was insane, towering over the sand like some celebrity's retreat. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek modern lines, marble steps leading up from the boardwalk. Inside, it was even more surreal. Polished floors, minimalist furniture, artwork that probably cost more than my car. I barely had time to take it in before Ryan and Marcella disappeared down a hallway, leaving me alone with Gianna. She leaned in, smiling, and everything went black. Not the kind of blackout where fragments return later. Just a gap, a chasm, hours of life swallowed whole. Yet when I checked my phone later, I found texts I had supposedly sent. To Jimmy, "Thanks for the event, we crashed at a buddy's place." To my dad, "Safe, sleeping on a couch." To a girl I'd been talking to, casual words about thinking of her. My tone, my style. But I had no memory of typing any of it. When awareness returned, the sun was overhead. I was lying in bushes I didn't recognize, head pounding, mouth dry as sand. I sat up slowly, heart pounding as I realized nothing was familiar. The street curved into more trees, no ocean, no boardwalk, no beach houses. I looked down at myself and froze. I wasn't wearing my clothes. My t-shirt, my jeans, even my jacket were gone. In their place, oversized shorts and a faded hoodie that smelled faintly of mildew. My shoes were the only things that remained mine, but even they were wrong. The laces stripped out, the fabric soaked as if I'd been walking through water. My wallet was gone, my keys, my phone, every trace of my life stripped away. I staggered across the road to the only landmark I could see, a 7-Eleven. The clerk eyed me suspiciously as I stumbled in, but when I asked to use the phone, he slid it across without a word. The only number I still had memorized was my sister's. I dialed with shaking hands, voice cracking as I explained what had happened. She gave me Ryan's number. I called it again and again. No answer. Just as I was about to break down completely, the bell over the door jingled. I turned, and there he was. Ryan, disheveled, pale, wearing clothes that weren't his. We stared at each other for a second, then practically collapsed into each other's arms. His story was the same. Same blackout, same waking up in bushes, same missing belongings. We called the police. To their credit, they listened at first, asked questions, drove us to a parking lot where, unbelievably, both our phones were found lying side by side on the asphalt. The officers took that as proof we'd just been sloppy drunk, that we dropped them ourselves. They didn't care that neither of us remembered hours of our lives, or that we'd woken up in strange clothes. They told us we were lucky nothing worse had happened, gave us their cards, and left. Back in Jimmy's car heading home, I scrolled through the texts on my phone. Dozens of them. Sent at times when I was completely unconscious. They weren't nonsense. They weren't gibberish. They sounded exactly like me. That scared me more than anything else. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and I tried to piece it together. We went back to the house we thought was Marcella's. An old man answered the door, confused, and told us he didn't have a daughter or granddaughter by that name. He laughed when we explained, said some girl must have been lying, but the laugh didn't erase the chill in my stomach. To this day, I don't know what happened to us. Maybe we were drugged with something rare, something that lets you move, talk, even type messages without remembering later. Maybe there were more people involved, watching us, guiding us like puppets. Maybe it was worse, something I can't even let myself imagine. But when I think about those girls, their flawless smiles, their expensive clothes, the way they pressed those drinks into our hands, my stomach knots up. We weren't targeted. We walked up to them. That's what haunts me most. We chose it. We walked into it with open eyes, laughing, thinking it was just another wild night at the shore. And we barely made it back out.